But in hour one tonight, let me tell you about my next guest, or my first guest, should I say. I met this guy in Glastonbury, and if you've bought Chris Everard's DVD about the murder of, and I say murder in inverted commas, of Princess Diana, you'll know that this guy was in it and spent quite a lot of time going through the reasoning as to why he believes that this was no accident. John King is the UK's leading authority on the death of Princess Diana, having spent more than 10 years investigating the circumstances in which she died, and having authored 2 books on the subject, Princess Diana, The Hidden Evidence, and the massively updated and newly titled paperback edition, Princess Diana, The Evidence, SPI Books, New York. By profession an investigative journalist, editor and screenwriter, John King is also the best-selling author of Cosmic Top Secret, The Unseen Agenda. Former editor of several UK magazines and founder-editor of the new alternative news and media website Conscious Ape. Now you can find that at consciousape.com. That's C-O-N-S-C-I-O-U-S, consciousape.com. Over the years, John has appeared on many TV and radio talk shows, including GMTV, Good Morning, Channel 4's The Diana Conspiracy, and of course Chris Everard's DVD, which we were talking about just a couple of months ago here on the show. He's appeared in the UK, America and elsewhere around the world, and has also consulted on several TV documentaries in both Britain and America. John lives locally and he's on the phone right now. John, good evening.
Good evening, Ross. How are you?
Great, good to hear from you. Good to speak to you again. We've shared a beer once or twice down in Glastonbury, and it's good now to actually have you on the show.
Yeah, great to be here, Ross. Yeah.
Now, give us a little bit of background first off. Tell us how you got involved in investigating the Di phenomena.
Well, it came about quite by chance, really. I mean, Diana really wasn't on my radar, particularly before all this came up. But I was aware, obviously, that she seemed to adorn the front page of every newspaper, etc., etc. But the thing was, it's all explained in quite detail in the book, actually, Ross. So just very briefly, I grew up in a military background, and in Sandhurst, where the Royal Military Academy is situated. There are numerous MOD compounds and other kind of various top-secret establishments, all in about a 30 or 40-mile radius around Sandhurst. And there's also one or two shall we say, unofficial establishments as well, what we might call private security firms, ex-SAS, ex-intelligence guys, doing the dirty work for MI6, basically in countries like Angola, where Diana's landmines campaign was, and was mainly focused. And to cut a very long story short, I knew an awful lot of these people. I happened to grow up with them, and perhaps their younger brothers. I was at school with them, and so I kind of knew a lot of these guys. I was never part of that operation at all, but I knew a lot of them. And to cut the story short, I was made aware of something big that was about to happen. These guys knew what was going on various levels of security and intelligence. And shortly before Diana's so-called accident, I was made aware of something big that was going to happen. And so when, of course, Diana did die in that car crash, in circumstances everybody seemed to feel perhaps was slightly suspicious, to say the least, I kind of thought, well, I better look into this. I was a journalist anyway. I was working on various other topics that I was talking to these guys about anyway. And but as I just started to look, and it didn't take long, Ross, to be honest with you, to see that there were all kinds of anomalies and questions that seemed to be arising. The more we looked into it, I partnered up with someone who's become a very close friend of mine, John Beveridge, who helped research and investigate the book with me. And so that's really how it came about. And before we knew it, we were kind of hooked and into it, and it just became all-absorbing for a couple of years back there. I mean, it's been ongoing ever since, but certainly in those first few years, it was a quite life-changing experience.
I can imagine it was. Now, a lot of people obviously are saying that the Royal Inquest found that Diana's death was caused by a combination of drink driving and gross negligence on the part of the paparazzi. Shouldn't we just accept this now and let Diana rest in peace?
Well, yeah, a lot of people are saying that, but also a lot of people, I think, realise you know, that the inquest was pretty much a whitewash, you know. I mean, it was designed specifically to discredit the evidence as far as I'm concerned. One example is when the inquest was first announced, shall we say, Lord Stevens was tasked with investigating the case to compile what would eventually become the coroner's report effectively. And the remit Lord Stevens was given, this is about January 2004, was, I'll paraphrase this, Ross, because I haven't got it in front of me, I can't quote it exactly, but it was to effectively investigate whether or not Diana and Dodie died under any other circumstances other than an accident, if there was any foul play whatsoever. It was a very broad remit. And so far as everybody knew, those were the terms of reference for the investigation. And it wasn't until the investigation was finally completed, some 3 years and £4 million worth of taxpayers' money later, that we found out that remit had somehow been narrowed right down, and now it was an investigation into an allegation made by Mohammed Al-Fayed into conspiracy to murder. That was the entire remit now of the investigation and the inquest, which meant that all kinds of evidence was simply not included in the investigation, certainly not investigated during the inquest. So I don't think the terms of reference for the inquest were nearly broad enough for it to be considered a fair and comprehensive inquiry into Diana's death. It was simply an inquest into the allegation made by Mohammed Al-Fayed, who was, of course, made out to look a complete fool at the inquest, in my opinion, and thus a lot of the evidence was kind of discredited along with him. So.
Well, I've seen a lot of stuff come through now, and in particular I watched the DVD that Chris Everard made, Lady Di, which is 4 hours in length, and Penny and I sat down and watched it in instalments, bit by bit, and I have to say the evidence is quite compelling that this was not an accident. Indeed,
yeah. I mean, so much has come up as well since the investigation. There were one or two little good bits came out of Lord Stevens' investigation and the report and the inquest and all of that side of things, because obviously he had an awful lot of money to go and uncover and talk to everybody and tooth comb the whole case, really. So yeah, I mean, one interesting point that did come up that was again completely just kind of brushed aside at the inquest was the fact that Lord Stevens' team, the French inquiry which took place in about 1998, they carried out their own examination of the car, the Mercedes in which Diana died. But later on, during Lord Stevens' investigation, about 2006 I think, he finally got to look at the car and examined it again. And they found that the rear right seatbelt was jammed in the retracted position. Now, everybody immediately after the accident was saying, why wasn't anybody wearing a seat? Why wasn't Diana particularly wearing a seatbelt? We interviewed the country's leading expert on road traffic accidents, Professor Mackay of Birmingham University, and he assured us if Diana had been wearing a seatbelt, she almost certainly would have survived the accident. She was sitting in what he called the most survivable seat, which was the rear right seat.
Okay, let me stop you there, John, because we've got to go into an ad break. Just hold that thought, because we'll come back on this seatbelt thing in just a moment. What do you think at home? Ross at nowthat'sweird.co.uk. We're going to be stripping down John's evidence through the next hour and finding out why there is something to this. This is essential listening. Do not leave. We'll be here, back with you right after this.
Visit the show's official website, nowthat'sweird.co.uk, and meet the team behind the show.
Yes, welcome back. This is Now That's Weird with me, Ross Hemsworth, and some powerful subjects on tonight's show. In hour 3, as I said earlier, we're going to be talking about whether Hitler actually survived World War II, and there does seem to be a great deal of evidence now supporting this, and lived out his life in either Argentina or Ecuador. I've got an early email in for that, just says, thanks for your show. Hitler's bodyguard's deathbed confessions said that Hitler did leave and faked his death. I heard he lived to be well over 100 years old. Ciao. Well, thanks for that. I don't know if Ciao is the name or if a ciao is just a thank you at the end, but thanks very much for the email. Got some emails in as well. One from John Warren Oakes in Hunting Creek, Bowling Green, Kentucky. And he said, Western Kentucky University beat Illinois last night in the NCAA basketball tournament. Thanks for letting us know about that, John. Much appreciated. And he says, hi and good evening to Penny. Rosie in Southampton says, hi both. Is it true that Diana was seen alive outside of her car after the impact? And that's from Rosie in Southampton. And before I put that to John, let me just tell you, when this death happened, I was actually taking a break from all the media stuff altogether, and I was driving lorries. And I was in an HGV-1 in a convoy driving up through Belgium when the accident happened. And I use accident in inverted commas. And on the radio came the news bulletin that Diana was out of the car, was standing alongside the car, watching the firemen cutting people from the wreckage. Now, that news bulletin only ever seemed to go out once and was never heard of again. So, yes, Rosie, I know from what I heard that was reported. Now, whether it was an incorrect report that had been relayed back to a newsroom and they just got it wrong, I can't say. But I do know that I heard that report, and Chris Everard has now backed that up in his DVD, Lady Di. So it's an interesting one. But, John, what do you make of that? Princess Di standing outside the car on the night of the accident.
Yeah, there were several, many conflicting reports immediately after the accident, Ross, also Dr. Maillet examining Diana immediately after the accident and saying that it was not catastrophic. There was, she was okay. She was going to survive. A lot of reports. What actually happened in the first couple of minutes, those crucial couple of minutes immediately after impact, is really where I think the truth lies in all of this. But yeah, I mean, who can say? There were certainly reports that Diana was not in a critical condition. That's for certain.
Okay. Well, we'll go into this in a bit more depth as we go through. But I just want to come back to the seatbelt thing, because just before the break, we had to interrupt you. You were telling us about the seatbelt being jammed, so she could not have been wearing a seatbelt at the time of the accident.
Well, that's right, and this has now been confirmed, actually, officially, in the coroner's report, that the seatbelt that Diana would have been wearing, all the other seatbelts were functioning normally, apparently. But Diana's seatbelt was, quote, jammed in the retracted position, unquote. So she couldn't have worn the seatbelt had she wanted to. And the point is, just briefly, Ross, is that immediately after the accident, many of her friends and family came out asking that very question. Why on earth wasn't Diana wearing her seatbelt? Because she'd become so, paranoid almost for her own life. As we know, 18 months previous to the accident, she'd written that letter, about being concerned about dying in an accident, dying in a car accident, brake failure and serious head injury, they're trying to kill me, etc., etc. This is a genuine letter that was lodged with her lawyer, Lord Mishcon. Now, she was aware of some kind of plot to assassinate her 18 months prior to her death, and it's just people were saying, her closest friends were saying, because of this letter, because of this fear, because she was saying she was going to die in a helicopter accident or a car accident, she'd become it was almost now a religious observance of her. She would seatbelt up everywhere she went, even if she just went, down the road half a mile. So they all questioned seriously why she was not wearing a seatbelt. They all said there's no way she would have got in the car and driven from the Ritz back to Dodie's apartment at that kind of, even at 70 or 80 miles an hour without wearing a seatbelt. Well, now we know why she couldn't wear a seatbelt, because as the coroner's report now confirms, it was jammed and she couldn't.
Now, I know there was a lot of discrepancies with this car, and this car had actually been stolen and apparently not used for anything. There was virtually no mileage on the clock. It was stolen, taken away, something done to it, and then returned. And then it happened to be the only car on the carpool that was actually available on that night, which is very, very strange, because this was a large carpool we were talking about. But as I say, we'll come back to some of these points. What new evidence do you believe you've actually uncovered in your new book, John?
Well, certainly the seatbelt is part of it, Ross. I mean, that's a crucial part of the evidence. But there are many other bits and pieces. The and there are bits and pieces here and there. We've really had to sift through. We tooth-combed this report. It was a massive, great big tome, but we tooth-combed it. And another one was an interesting point. I tried to highlight the most pertinent points, really, for tonight, is the point about brake failure. Now, you know, Diana actually wrote in her note that she'd been warned, effectively, by her own bodyguards, by people who were kind of informing her about the MI5 and MI6 surveillance on her, that the accident may well be brought about by brake failure. She actually used those two words, brake failure. Now, we know, again from the report, and this is something the French report 9 years previously had completely covered up and lied about, blatantly lied about. But we now know from the coroner's report, again, which was completely brushed aside at the inquest, we now know that just as Henri Paul was driving into the tunnel, the brakes on the Mercedes failed. They failed to work, and hence there were no skid marks in the tunnel at all. Now, if you imagine, no matter what state of mind you're in, if you're in a state of panic or whatever, if you're about to slam into a concrete pillar at about 60 or 70 miles an hour, then it's just an instinctive reaction, a human reaction. You would slam on the brakes. And I believe that's exactly what Henri Paul did, but they failed. Anyway, the brakes failed. That is now official. So there's no way he could have slowed down the car because the brakes weren't working. And this all leads on to, it leads back to what you were just talking to about Ross, about the car being stolen. And the only thing really that was taken from the car was what's known as the EMS, the Electronic Management System, which is effectively a microchip transceiver that controls it controls various things, mainly the steering and the brakes. That had gone missing, and it was replaced at some point, and no one knows exactly who replaced this EMS. And that is crucial because we discovered that a little known back then, but these days a bit better known assassination technique employed by the intelligence services of the West is a method known as the Boston brakes. It's called the Boston brakes because effectively it kills your brakes and takes over the steering, and it was first deployed by the CIA in Boston. It's just become known within security and intelligence circles as the Boston brakes. Now, this may sound all a bit far-fetched and a bit James Bond, but it's absolutely confirmed by no less a figure than former SAS officer and world-famous explorer Sir Ranulph Fiennes, who confirmed that someone that he knew from the SAS, a former SAS Major Michael Marmon, was assassinated in England on the A303 near Stonehenge in 1986 in precisely this manner by the method known as the Boston brakes. And when he was questioned about it, because he's actually a personal friend of Prince Charles as well, when he was actually questioned about this and kind of relating to Diana's accident, he just went stum. He didn't know what to say. He was completely embarrassed, completely flummoxed, and in the end it was a no comment, thank you very much. But it's just interesting tying all those things together. The EMS chip was stolen. Why do you steal an S280 Mercedes limousine shortly before the accident and just abandon it? It was found abandoned. Nothing was wrong with it, except this chip was missing.
And the strange thing about this is you can buy those chips for next to nothing on eBay. So why would you go to that sort of trouble? It doesn't make any sense. Now let's move on to the carbon monoxide found in Henri Paul's blood. Was this anomaly ever actually resolved? Because to me it seems to have just been brushed over.
Exactly. Again, the thing about the report that Lord Stevens compiled, effectively, Ross, is that there are so many points where it could go either way. And on this particular point, it is blatantly obvious that no medical expert anywhere he could find could help him to dispel this, get rid of this problem that he had here, trying to explain away 20.7% carbon monoxide poisoning in Henri Paul's blood. Now, any normal, it's enough to incapacitate a mountain gorilla. Never mind, a mere mortal like us. So There's no way Henri Paul could have stood up, never mind drive a car. Not if he's also allegedly just drunk the equivalent of about 2 bottles of wine. It's just not going to happen. But no, to answer your question, the issue of the carbon monoxide was not resolved at all in the report. It was explained away in some way or other by Lord Stevens, but the point is that 6 other eminent medical experts, headed up by Professor Venices of Glasgow University, openly and publicly challenged Lord Stevens' verdict and conclusion on this. And in the end, what they did, now this is really interesting, any medical expert will tell you that even the heaviest of smokers will be expected to have between 5 and 8% carbon monoxide in their blood. Now, Henri Paul was not a heavy smoker. He did smoke a few cigarillos a day, but he was not by any means a heavy smoker.
But what was the actual amount of carbon monoxide he had?
20.7% in his blood. Now, just very briefly, Professor Venices and his eminent colleagues conducted an experiment. They put 20 people in a room, had them, each of them, smoke 20 cigarettes, chain smoke them one after the other, and each one of those people were blood tested within 15 minutes of having smoked 20 cigarettes in a row, and the highest reading was something like 12%.
Exactly, it's crazy.
I mean, the only way you get 20% odd in your bloodstream is if you sit in a car and swallow the exhaust fumes from,
Now, I can also add to this, John, and I'm sure you're aware of this, that there was a statement put out that this was something that is involved in the inside of an airbag. So when an airbag goes off, it releases carbon monoxide. Now, a senior technician from Mercedes was interviewed about this, and he said there should be absolutely no carbon monoxide coming out of an airbag when it goes off.
That's absolutely correct. Yes, and because he did say that, the coroner at the inquest was forced to admit that was the case now, and the airbag splitting was ruled out as the cause.
Absolutely. Okay, let's look at this photographer, James Anderson. Now, it's reported that he was the owner of a white Fiat Uno, very similar to the one involved in the crash. Now, isn't there some suggestion that this man was actually an MI6 employee?
Absolutely. I think all the evidence, when you look at it, suggests he certainly was. He certainly worked for French intelligence. He certainly did have strong connections with MI6. There's no question about that. He did own a white Fiat Uno, but I have to say that it looks to me, it very much looks like the white Fiat Uno scenario with as far as James Anderson's concerned could be a bit of a red herring, really. It's a bit like when the way that Lord Stevens tried to, he picked out 2 or 3 points and hung everything on those 3 points, and each one of them really are red herrings. It's almost as if, James Anderson, was he driving the white Fiat Uno? No. If we can prove no, then of course MI6 had nothing to do with it. It's a bit like the Diana pregnancy thing. Was she pregnant with Dodie's child? No. Then there's no motive for her, her assassination. It's a bit of a red herring. I mean, I've always thought that, if James Anderson seriously, I mean, there's a difference. We must sort of see that there's a difference between being a paid informant for MI6 and possibly a hired assassin. The evidence seems to suggest that although James Anderson was certainly in the tunnel that night, he admitted that to friends afterwards, and he certainly took some very compromising photographs in the tunnel. But I don't think it was his white Fiat Uno. But it may have been his, but I don't think he was driving it. If he was involved in any kind of, operation of that nature, I think he would have been completely foolish to be driving his own car.
No, I agree. Okay, well, let's move on, because time is sort of getting in front of us, and I've got a lot more to ask you.
Yes.
We've got about 1 minute before the next break, so can you give us a quick potted answer to this one? Yes. Is it true that Henri Paul was also on the payroll of MI6?
Without question, yes. £175,000 in cash deposited in 15 different bank accounts. There's no other explanation other than he was being paid in cash, which is regular for cash for services kind of scenario. Richard Tomlinson said the same, that would be about, and David Shaler told me the same as well, that he was making deposits regularly of £4,000 cash into his 15 different bank accounts. The phone numbers of his contacts back at French intelligence were found in his address book after his death. There's no question that he was working for British intelligence, yes.
Okay, thanks, John. We'll rejoin you in just a moment. We need to go into another break. It's a story that just won't go away, isn't it? For many, many years, since the actual accident itself, people still keep coming back and saying there has been a cover-up. This was not an accident. What do you think? Ross at nowthat'sweird.co.uk. We've had Chris Everard on the show before telling us about this. We've seen the Lady Di film. I know a lot of you bought that after hearing Chris on the show. And now John's here to answer your questions. Ross at nowthat'sweird.co.uk. What do you think? Well, it can't be bad. Now, we're talking in hour one tonight about the death of Princess Diana. It's a story that just won't go away. No matter what they keep telling us, the conspiracies roll on. And I've got a couple of emails here, so let's go through these first. First one's from someone who wants to remain anonymous. Says, do you think she may have been having Dodi's child, which would have been a Muslim child, and when her son becomes king and head of the Church of England, he would have a Muslim half-brother, and this may be a reason why she was killed? John, what do you make of that one?
I certainly do, yeah. I certainly believe that they were concerned about that. I think the point there really is that whether or not Diana was pregnant is not quite the point. The point is she could have become pregnant at any time, of course. She was certainly planning a longer-term relationship with Dodi, possibly even marriage. So she certainly could have become pregnant at any time, couldn't she? So
absolutely. Well, the one thing that's always puzzled me is just before she died, she said that immortal line of, what I will do next will shock the world.
Yeah.
And that's always sort of saying to me there was something going on. There is a conspiracy going around, John, I don't know if you've heard it, we're going to talk about why the ambulance took so long in just a moment, but at that period outside the hospital, she was actually taken out the ambulance and another body put in there, and that she's still living somewhere on an island. But we'll go into that one a bit later. Let's go into the next email. We all know about the Say No to Secret Society's motive for JFK's assassination, but maybe I've missed this. Was this the motive for Princess Diana's assassination? Cheers, Ross, and hi, Penny, from Mike Philbin in Oxford.
I missed that, Ross. Sorry, I didn't get the gist of that one.
He said the Say No to Secret Society's motive has been put forward for John F. Kennedy's assassination, but was that the motive for Princess Diana?
Well, as far as we know, as far as John and I have come to ascertain after all of this time, is that the motive behind Diana's death was complex and diverse, really. But I think the overriding motive has to be simply the same as JFK, the same as John Lennon, the same as Martin Luther King. She had simply become so popular and so powerful because of her popularity that she was able to sway public opinion against the status quo. And when someone is really seriously able to do that, I think they become an untenable threat. And I honestly believe that is the overriding motive. But I think there are many motives, smaller motives that behind that as well. Her landmines campaign, yes, her relationship with Dodi Fayed, the threat she'd become to the monarchy, a lot of different aspects to it. But ultimately, simply because she'd become so popular.
Yeah. Okay, now it's always seemed odd to me that there were no CCTV images of the journey of the crash. Now, if I remember rightly, didn't the French claim that the cameras in Paris weren't working on that one night?
They did, but I think what we found now is that they were all turned inwards. That's the official explanation anyway that was given at the inquest, is there were 10 cameras en route and one positioned above the tunnel, on the fly past above the tunnel, filming the cars coming into the tunnel. But that one apparently wasn't working, and the other 10 cameras were all pointed inwards towards the buildings, filming the brickwork that they were mounted on, interestingly. That's the official explanation. Yeah,
it does seem very strange. Now, other researchers have pointed out that it took around 2 hours to get Diana to hospital. In your book, you seem a bit more sympathetic towards the paramedics at the scene, but can you tell us why this is?
Well, certainly, I mean, a lot was said of that over the years, and John and I have been first to jump up and ask all the questions, all the pertinent questions, and we're still not satisfied at all. But certainly, I'm a bit more reluctant these days, I have to say, since the Lord Stevens investigation, and these guys were actually named We didn't know who they were up until 2 or 3 years ago. But these guys, when you just take one step... I heard you talking about the New World Order a little bit earlier, Ross. There's a good point about, but New World Order, but globalisation, and all of that, the conspiracy surrounding that. And sometimes there's just another perspective on these things. Doesn't take away from the other side of it, but nonetheless, these guys are normal paramedics. There wasn't a conspiracy. They weren't intelligence operatives, all of them anyway. There were 3 separate ambulances there the police there, the fire engines, the whole of Paris, it turned out. These guys were regular paramedics and doctors, and I've got a lot of respect for paramedics. They do a fantastic job. So I just had to step back and think, well, I think that possibly we've been a little bit harsh in terms of some of the things that we've said about that. However, there are still certainly questions to be answered. Both. In terms of how long it took to get Diana to hospital. They say it took her something like 46 minutes to get her out of the car. She did have a heart attack in the car, apparently, and into the ambulance. And then, they travelled something like 8 or 9 miles per hour from the crash scene to the hospital, bypassing a perfectly good hospital en route, I might add. And then, as you said earlier on, they stopped for 10 minutes outside the hospital, effectively, because the doctor in charge claimed that Diana needed further attention. Well, these things, I think, should have been questioned and investigated far more vigorously than they have been. But they haven't, and I think because they haven't, then those questions still remain.
Okay, well, let me pick up on that point, because Chris Everard actually did the drive from the tunnel to the hospital in his car during a rush hour, and if I remember rightly, I think it took him 12 minutes. Yeah. It took 2 hours at night. Even driving at that slow speed, it shouldn't have taken 2 hours. Some people say that the ambulance actually took a detour, went off somewhere else, and maybe something happened there. But certainly for me, the puzzling thing has always been to stop outside of a hospital. No matter how injured the person in the ambulance is, surely there is more equipment to be able to deal with it inside that door than there is trying to do something in the ambulance outside. And certainly, as I said earlier, there was a conspiracy put to me a while back that she was actually swapped with another person. There was somebody else put into the ambulance at that point, and she was actually whizzed off for... she wasn't that injured, and apparently is still alive somewhere. Now, obviously, with the money that's available for plastic surgery these days, and I mean, someone with that sort of money and influence could quite easily buy an island and never be seen again. Do you think there's any possibility that something more untoward took place in that ambulance that night?
Well, I'm certainly open to possibilities, Ross. But I have to personally, I have to stick by. I mean, I've been deeply involved in this investigation for a long time, and I've spoken to a lot of people. I have had access to several deep cover intelligence and security people, and I am utterly convinced that she was assassinated, that she's not alive anywhere today, that she was assassinated by very powerful people that she was threatening. Okay. But I do think you're absolutely right about we interviewed a senior paramedic officer in this country. And yes, the French do things differently, but you're absolutely right. If you're a couple of seconds or a couple of minutes away from the hospital, then all the equipment's in there. In particular, when someone has had such a high-impact accident as Diana had, because the first assumption must be that they are probably bleeding internally. You can't necessarily tell that, but you have to assume that they are probably bleeding internally, and therefore they need to get to theatre as soon as. And so there's no excuse at all for taking over 2 hours to get Diana to a hospital that was 3.25 miles away.
No, I absolutely agree. Now, there were suggestions that Diana was illegally embalmed to cover up a pregnancy. What do you know about that?
Well, there's an awful lot. There's obviously not time to go into all of that right now, but there's an awful lot of evidence to back that up without question. We found out that the person who gave, in France, if you don't, you need to get the permission of the mayor, the chief police officer, or one of their subordinates. One of those 3 people before you're allowed to embalm anybody. If you don't get their permission in any particular town or district, then that person has been embalmed illegally. And that's what happened to Diana, because we discovered and we found out conclusively that the person who gave the authority to embalm Diana was a man called Keith Moss. And Keith Moss was the Consul General at the British Embassy on the night Diana died. And he was there with Sir Michael Jay, who was the British Ambassador on the night Diana died, with 2 serving senior MI6 officers who are named in the book as well. And we know for sure that Keith Moss gave the order for Diana to be embalmed when she needn't be embalmed at all. All that was needed was that Prince Charles and various luminaries and this and that the other were on their way to view the body, so she needed to be kind of cleaned up for presentation purposes. But she was illegally embalmed, and one can only assume that she was embalmed in case she was pregnant
Well, they did make a very big point of saying that it was proven that she wasn't pregnant, and there's that old line, isn't there, of, I think he doth protest too much.
Indeed, yeah, absolutely, yeah. So if she wasn't pregnant, she wasn't. But the point, as I was saying earlier, it's about these red herrings that they throw in. They hung everything at the inquest on this point. This was the point I was making at the beginning of the show, Ross, when I said that the remit had been narrowed right down, and now all the inquest had to deal with was the allegation made by Mohammed al-Fayed. And Mohammed al-Fayed's allegation, of course, was completely hung on this point, that Diana was pregnant with his son's child, and that's why they murdered her. That was his allegation. And so if they could prove that Diana wasn't pregnant, then that would null and void Mohammed al-Fayed's allegation, and therefore the slate's wiped clean, verdict is accident, and off you go, that's how they did it. But the point is, it doesn't matter whether she was pregnant or not. The point is, as we said just now, she was in a long-term relationship with Dodi. She could possibly have come pregnant at any time, and that's what they didn't want. But there was certainly a manic attempt, when you read all of the evidence, to make absolutely sure that she was embalmed that night, illegally.
Absolutely. Now, what do you expect to achieve by bringing it all up again, John? Because even Mohammed al-Fayed now has agreed to call it a day and seems to have accepted the result.
Well, indeed, you know what, Russ, I honestly believe that somewhere deep in the psyche of the British public, they want the truth. It's a bit like, it was 2-3 decades before Oliver Stone brought out JFK the movie but everyone flocked to see it because, incidentally, a company at Pinewood Studios has bought the rights to make a film of my book as well. So hopefully that'll be coming out later on this year.
Great, that's good news.
And the point being that I honestly think the British public want to see and want to read the truth. Or at least a different version of the truth that is closer to what they believe happened.
I agree. Well, I've read your book, and I have to say it's a riveting read. Now, where can people get a copy of this?
Well, at the moment you can get it on Amazon, of course. You can get it hopefully through our website at Conscious Ape. That's it at the moment. I mean, the Gazella, you caught me at the very beginning. It's only just arrived in the UK. It's been published in America. That's a story behind that as well. But anyway, it's published in America. It's out in the US. But I'm not sure where it is in the US. Probably, hopefully at Barnes & Noble and the stores. But if not, you can always get it on Amazon. That's probably the safest bet right now.
Fantastic. Now, we've got about a minute to go. Just very quickly, tell us about this new project you're working on, Conscious Ape.
Yeah, Conscious Ape website, consciousape.com. Come along and see the website. It's a new alternative news and media website, a bit of social networking as well. You can log on to the forums and chat about various things, conspiracies, paranormal, alternative news. And we'd love to see you on the forums. Come on here and talk to me about Princess Diana, because I'd love to know what the British public are still thinking about this, because it has gone quiet after the inquest. But I really still think that there's a lot of interest out there, and people still want to get to the bottom of what happened. So, yeah, we're just literally just launching Conscious Ape, so please come along, have a look at it.
Fantastic. Well, could I ask you, John, if you've got a few minutes after you come off air this evening, to go onto the Now That's Weird website, register for an account, pop in the chat room, because I know there's a lot of my listeners in there would love to have a chat with you. So if you do get a chance to do that, that would be greatly appreciated.
I certainly will.
That's fantastic. John, it's always a delight. I hope we can get together for a beer again real soon, and you take care of yourself. Good luck with the book.
Cheers, Ross.
Thanks a lot.
Bye-bye.
Cheers now. Bye-bye. There you go. That's John King, and what an interesting hour.